Hello everyone, welcome to AWS Tutorials. In AWS Tutorials, we provide workshops and exercises to learn about AWS services. These workshops and exercises are published to our website aws-dojo.com. Today, I'm going to talk about how to use AWS Glue Workflow to orchestrate crawlers and jobs. So, just to give introduction, so when you are creating a data lake and you're trying to create a data pipeline to ingest the data, to process your data, many times you need to orchestrate multiple crawlers and glue jobs in a workflow in certain sequence in order to complete your whole pipeline task. And that's where AWS Glue Workflow comes to help. It can be used to create a very complex job where you can orchestrate multiple crawlers and glue jobs in order to complete your pipeline requirements end to end. So today we are going to learn how to configure Glue Workflow and what are different things you should be you should know in order to configure a Glue Workflow. So let's get started. And of course, I have a workshop towards the end, which will give you an hands-on experience of working with AWS Glue Workflow. So moving on. So what are the key components of Glue Workflow? And here is the simple part. And the simple part is that Glue Workflow has just two key components, trigger and the node. And trigger and node has got their respective responsibilities. So for instance, these are different icons you will see with the trigger, and I will explain it in a bit what it means. And these are different icons you will see with the node. But basically, trigger is something which starts something, which kickstarts something. So trigger can kickstart the workflow itself. It can start the crawler, or it can also start a job. So trigger is responsible for either starting the workflow itself, or a crawler, or a job. Simple. And the second one is the node. And node is responsible for either running a job or a crawler. So with triggers and the nodes, you can really create a very complex workflow where you can orchestrate your glue jobs and glue crawlers. So keep this to in mind. There's two things to keep in mind, triggers and nodes. Those two components can really create very complex workflow. So let's get some more details about it. So if I'm, okay, before I go to designing of the workflow. So when you're trying to create a workflow, as I said, that workflow is responsible for orchestrating your glue jobs and glue crawler. So one of the prerequisites is that before you configure your workflow, you should have your glue job and crawlers already created. Yeah. So have your glue job and crawlers created, configured, tested individually to make sure they are working. And once that is ready, then you can go and configure workflow to orchestrate them. That's the only prerequisite we need to have. Now, moving on, how do you design a workflow? In a workflow, actually your trigger node come in a kind of alternate. Okay, so you always start with a trigger, and there you the first trigger is you use to start the workflow. Yeah, so I mentioned trigger can be used to start the workflow, job, or crawler. So your workflow always starts with a trigger because you need to start the workflow. So the first trigger starts the workflow, and it can start the workflow either in a scheduled manner. That means you can schedule that you can schedule. That means your trigger will schedule your workflow, or you can also configure it to run manually. Like in the lab today, I'm going to use it manually because you will run it on demand. So keep in mind the first component of the workflow is always a trigger, which is used to start the workflow, and it can be configured to either start based on schedule or on demand like manual. Then the second component comes is a node. And node is responsible for either running a job or a crawler. So when your workflow has started, of course, you have to decide whether you want to run a job or a crawler, and that depends on your business logic, what you want to implement. And of course, you can run more than one job, more than one crawler, or crawler or job in combination as well. But the second step is always a always a job. Now, once you have run the job, then you might want to run, you might end your workflow there saying, hey, I run this 4 jobs and I'm done. Or you might say, no, I need to create some more crawlers and work. I want to run some more crawlers and workflow, crawlers or jobs. In that case, you introduce trigger again. So next time, trigger can come again and saying, okay, once I have run one set of jobs or crawlers, if you want to run another set of jobs or crawlers, you go back to trigger again. And here, the trigger is based on event. Okay, so keep this in mind. Trigger is based on event at this point in time. So when you're starting a workflow, the trigger is based on schedule or a manual. But when it's starting a job or crawler, the trigger is based on event. Now here, we can configure trigger to say, okay, look for a particular job to finish and then start. Or you can also say, look for all these crawlers or jobs to finish and then start. That means your trigger can look for a particular event, or your trigger can look for all the events, all the events happening before that. So again, you can introduce the trigger again, where you can configure it to look for a specific event or look for all the events. That means look for a specific crawler or job to finish, or look for all crawlers or job to finish. And that's where these two icons change. Any is when you're looking for a specific event to finish, and all is when you're looking for all the events. All events mean all the crawlers or jobs which has finished. You look for them to finish, and then you want to start. So this trigger will start depending on any and all, based on the previous jobs or crawlers getting finished. And then these triggers can then start another set of crawlers and jobs. And to be honest, this process can continue. You can add a trigger after this, which will again invoke based on finishing of these jobs or crawlers, and it will invoke another set of jobs and crawlers, and so on. So this is how your workflow design works. You start with starting the workflow. You call then job or the crawler. Then you introduce the trigger again to call next set of jobs and crawler, and then you invoke trigger again, and then job again, and then trigger again. So that's how this flow works: trigger node, trigger node, trigger node kind of flow. Okay. So let's see a little more closer to this design. So let's go step by step. So first step is I'm starting a workflow, and I'm putting a trigger which can again can be based on schedule or the manual, and then I can say, okay, I'm going to add a node to run a job. So I can simply go and say, hey, I'm adding a node to run a job. So when I configure this node, I can say, okay, this is the job. And then, of course, it gives you a nice UI to configure the job. And you can say, okay, this is the job I want to run. So this is an example where this trigger, when the workflow starts, it starts the job. Okay. But there could be a case that you want to run a crawler as well. In that case, you can add one more node here behind this trigger saying, I want to run this crawler as well. Or you know what, even more jobs. So you can keep adding nodes post this trigger to run more than one job or the crawler. Again, that is again based on your business logic, your business requirement. And then once I have run one set of crawlers and jobs, you introduce the trigger again. And now this time I'm adding a trigger because I want to run another set of jobs or the crawlers. And in this case, I can say, okay, I'm adding a trigger, and this trigger is saying that wait for this job to finish. This is a simple example saying wait for this job to finish. And that's why you can see any here. So that's why it's looking for the event of this job, and it's looking for either this job to fail or the job to succeed. So again, you can look for both type of events. You can look for success event, you can look for fail event, and depending on you can do your job. Again, you might want to use the fail event. You might want to use the fail event to handle, say, exception or those kind of things, and success for the successful flow. So yeah, you can add a trigger here, which is saying, okay, I'm looking for fail or success of this job, and that's why you can see any here because it's looking for one particular event. But it could be the case where saying, you know what, I'm triggering an event, I'm putting an event here saying, look for all three to finish. So when this job is successful, then this crawler is successful, this job is successful. So it will like kind of waiting. It's waiting till all the previous nodes have finished their job successfully or fail, depending on how you have configured it. Then I proceed. Okay, so you can really here you're creating a fork. Here you're kind of merging back. And yeah, you can decide whether you want to look for one particular event or you want to look for finishing off more than one event, more than one jobs and crawlers. Wait for that to happen, and then you decide, wow, I'm going to do some more thing. That means I go and call another job or another crawler. Okay, so this is how you can configure your workflow. You need to have your previous jobs and crawlers already created, tested. All you're doing here in workflow is creating this kind of a diagram-based flow of your execution to create the complex business logic of your data pipeline. Okay, so that's how design works. And again, guys, when you do the workshop where I'm helping you build such workflow, there you will learn the experience. But in very simple terms, this is how it works. Now, moving on, one more thing which is important here and very good feature of workflow is that in workflow, you can define properties. So when you're configuring your workflow, you can go to this run properties, which is optional, not mandatory. And you can create this key value, name value kind of pair. Now, the beautiful part of this key value pair is that this is available for every job running in the workflow. So every job has access to this key value, and these jobs can not only read these values, but they can also write back. And that's where it becomes very interesting, because if you want one job to pass some state, some data to the next job, some information to the next job, if you want to kind of make kind of state transition from one job to another job, these can work as a parameters. So you can create a common runtime properties which jobs will read and update. So one job will read and make some update, which other jobs can read and understand what to do about it and make some update and so on. So this is a kind of common space of key value each job has access to, which they can read value from and write back, and that way jobs can really share state between each other. And it can also be used for other reporting and those kind of purposes. But the biggest value I see here is we are calling jobs in sequence, but how do I pass parameter between the jobs? Actually, you cannot pass parameters, but you can create these runtime properties which every job has access to, and by virtue of that, jobs can share state with each other. Okay, so this is again a very important property to know. Moving on, so to be honest, workflow is pretty straightforward. There are few more things you should know, but yeah, I mean, you can read AWS documentation about that. But if you want to start about the Glue workflow, these are the most fundamental things you should know. Now, what we are going to build today is pretty straightforward. We are going to create an S3 bucket where we'll have some customers.csv data file, which will simply go and create a crawler in the Glue, which will be able to crawl this data over here. So we'll create a crawler which can crawl this S3 data into Glue catalog. Then we create a Glue job which can read data from this Glue catalog and can write to the S3 bucket again. So this is one crawler, this is one Glue job, which is working on some catalog and writing, and this job is actually reading from this Glue catalog and writing to S3 bucket. And this crawler and job we will configure as a Glue workflow. So this is what we're going to do in the workshop today. In order to do the workshop, we have created and published a workshop to our website, aws-dojo.com. I have provided the workshop URL in the description box below as well. Now I'm going to show you the steps of the workshop, and post that you can use this link to run the workshop by your own. Just follow the instructions and you will able to finish this scenario end to end. And yeah, and learn how to configure the Glue workflow in AWS. So without wasting any more time, let's jump onto the workshop. So here is the workshop, and if I click on using Glue workflow, this was the link. We already talked about this scenario, so let me start the workflow right away. So once we click on the workflow, it shows you the tasks you need to perform to complete the workshop. So let's start following these tasks one by one. The first task is pretty straightforward. You need to have an AWS account, and if you don't have an AWS account, you might want to use this link to create an AWS account. Next, we create an IAM role, and this IAM role is used by Glue crawler and Glue Glue job to authorize the actions on other AWS services. So we log into AWS console, we go to IAM management console, say I want to create a role. This is the role for a Glue. We give simply power user access so that and of course in your production environment you want to give more stringent access, but here I'm trying to keep it very simple. And then we give this role a name called Dojo Glue role, and this role will be used by crawler and Glue job to perform their not authorize them to call other services, because like they will be accessing data from S3, they will be accessing data from Glue catalog, information from Glue catalog, they will write back to S3. All those permissions will be granted by this role. So having created the role, next step is to create S3 bucket. So here is the S3 bucket, and I have provided a very simple customers.csv file, which you can download from the link over here. And we create an S3 bucket, and then in this S3 bucket, actually we create 3 folders. Customers folder, where we are going to keep our source data, this customers.csv file, so you can download from here and you put into the customers folder. The script folders will be used by the Glue job to store the scripts and those kind of things. And target folder is where Glue job is going to write the target data. So when we run the Glue job, it will read from the customer.csv file the data using the catalog, and it will write to the target folder. So you create these 3 folders, and then of course in the customers folder you upload this customers.csv file so that my source data is ready for this particular workshop. Now we create a Glue workflow. So we go to, we create a Glue database. So we go to the Glue management console, we go to databases, say I want to add a database, and we name it DojoDB. Okay, so simple enough. Now we create a crawler, and crawler will be responsible for cataloging the customers.csv file stored into the S3 bucket. So we simply add a crawler, and we say this is a Dojo crawler, and then we say, okay, from where you want to read the data. So we say in the S3 bucket, there's a customers folder. In Dojo data, simply read data from there. It says, okay, which IAM role you want to use to perform this action, and you already have an IAM role, simply provide that IAM role here. And then, you simply say which database you want to create a table. Let's say I want to create data in DojoDB. And then simply you finish it. So you see here, we are simply configuring the crawler, but we are not running it because I want to run it with the workflow. But of course, when you're building in your implementation, you like to create it, test it, to see if it's working, and then of course use that inside the workflow. But I'm pretty confident that it will work. And in fact, I've tested this thing before creating the workshop, so it will work. So our crawler is ready, but so we just configured the crawler, but we have not run it. Now we are going to configure the glue job, and glue job will be pretty straightforward, guys. So it will simply read data from the customers.csv file using the catalog, and then it will write to the target folder in the S3 bucket again. So I'm just trying to create a very simple job here. So in order to create this job, we go to AWS Glue Management Console again. So I want to add a new job. We give this job a nice name, Dojo job, which role to use, Dojo Glue role to use. It's a Spark type of job. I want to write a new script. So I say I'm going to provide my own script here. It asks you what is your temporary directory, where you want to keep this script stored. And remember, we created a script folder in our S3 bucket, so we provide it here as a location. We simply save and say save the job and say I want to edit the script. And here we write our script, and script is pretty straightforward. If you don't understand the script, there's a PySpark training video, 2-part video in my YouTube channel. You can watch that to understand how these scripts work. But just to give you a very simple introduction, we are first creating a glue context using Spark context. Then we create our dynamic frame from the Dojo database from the customers table. So it is assuming that your customers table would have been created by crawler, because the way we'll configure the workflow is that first we'll run the crawler, and once my crawler has finished, then only I will run my job. So by the time my job runs, my crawler would have run. And if my crawler would have run, it would have created a customers table in my Dojo DB database. Simple. So I'm simply reading the data from customers table in Dojo database, Dojo DB. And then I'm simply using this write dynamic frame method in glue context to write data to S3 bucket. Simply read it and write back to the S3 bucket. And then this time I'm saying the location is target folder. And just to show a little transformation, I'm converting this CSV file into a JSON file. Simple, yeah, just keep it simple. So again, you simply save this job, but I'm not running this job here because I want to run this in my workflow. So now my crawler and job is ready. My prerequisite is there, so I can go and configure my workflow now. So we click on creating the workflow. So we go to in Glue Management Console, we say I want to add a workflow, and then we give this a nice name called Dojo Workflow. Right now I'm not using workflow properties over here, but if you are trying yourself, try to use workflow property. You'll need to add some more code into your Glue job to read data from the workflow properties, but I think it's worth trying if you want to practice how do you pass state from one job to another. And if you want, let me know. I can probably create a separate tutorials where I show you how to read and write from the workflow properties. But that's pretty straightforward, guys. You can do yourself, I'm sure. So we create a workflow, and after that, of course, when you create the workflow, your whole graph, your whole design is empty. So first you need to add a trigger, and this trigger you are adding to start the workflow. Remember, the first trigger is always to start the workflow, but I'm calling it start the crawler because when the workflow start, I want my crawler to start. So this one I'm calling say start the crawler. So yeah, of course it's starting the workflow, and the first step of the workflow is the crawler. So I'm saying let's start the crawler, and I'm making it on demand, and then after that, you can see that my crawler has been added, and it is on demand thing. And then it says it has one node. So, okay, fine. I have my starting trigger. Now, what do you want to do? This is what to do. And say I want to add a node. And this point of time, say I want to add a node, and I want to add a crawler here. So we simply go. We click on this add node, and then it shows you a pop-up where you can select your jobs and crawlers. So I go to this crawler tab and say, hey, Dojo crawler, select this crawler, because first step of the workflow is to run the crawler. So I added the crawler. So now you can see my trigger has been added, which is going to start the workflow, and then it is going to start with kickstart this Dojo crawler. So it will run my Dojo crawler. And after that, I want to add another trigger because the thing is that um, now that I have got uh, now that I've got sorry, not that I've got my one crawler running, I need to run a job after this. So for that, I go to the right hand side over here and say action. I want to add another trigger because after this crawler, I want to run another job. So I click on this add trigger and say, okay, fine. What's the name of the trigger? And say, now I want to start the job. But here I'm saying that start after any watched event or all watched event. The difference is, and I'm selecting, of course, event mechanism here, that any watched event is when you're looking for a particular event. All watched event when you're looking for all previous crawlers and jobs to finish. So in this case, well, I could have gone for all as well because there's only one crawler here. But I say, okay, let's go for any watched events where I have a choice to select my events. Actually, in all means all the previous events, right? So in this case, I'm going with a choice where I say I can select any watched event, and of course in any I can go and select all as well. But yeah, but the simple is that any you can select your event, and all you're saying all previous events. That's the primary difference. So I say I want to look for any watched event, and it will add in fact a trigger here. But right now this trigger is little orphan because it says okay, I'm looking for any watched event, and then I have to do some job after that. But then which event to watch? Yeah, so it is not able to find its parent that okay, which event to watch so that when it finishes or fails, I start. So for that, you have to go to the action over here and say, I want to add job crawler to watch. And for that, when you say, I want to add job crawler to watch, it will tell you, okay, fine. What do you want to see to succeed or fail? In this case, I want to say that when my crawler has finished successfully, then start this trigger. So in that case, in the pop-up, I go to the crawler, I select my Dojo crawler and say, I want it to successfully finish. Another option is failed, of course. And of course, you use failed option if you want to create some kind of exception handling. So in this case, I say that, okay, fine, go to the crawler and wait for this Dojo crawler to succeed. And I add that. And when you do that, you can see here that it's starting to come easy now. Now it's saying that, okay, fair enough. So this job, this trigger will start when my Dojo crawler finishes. Okay, I still have choice to look into more, but to be honest, there's no more event here. Yeah, this will go away in a while. Now I want to add what this trigger will do. And in order to do so, you have to click on add node again. And of course, in this case, my job is pretty straightforward. That is to run the Dojo job. Yeah, so you select the Dojo job in the pop-up and say this job I want to run from my second trigger. And when you add it, the whole flow looks pretty straightforward now. So I start my workflow, which eventually will start my Dojo crawler, and then my second trigger will wait for my Dojo crawler to finish, and then it will go and run my job. So you save everything, and after that you go to the Dojo workflow. Since I selected this Dojo crawler to run on demand, that means I have to manually run it. If it had been scheduled, then it could have run on the scheduled time. So I go to the workflow over here, say I want to run the workflow. Workflow will start running and it will finish the whole flow you have created as a part of your workflow. Wait till the status of the workflow is changed to completed. Now, once it is completed, you can go and see. So first thing was crawler, and crawler would have created a customers table in DojoDB. You can see that the crawler has created customers table in DojoDB. And the second one is that my job would have written my data into target folder. So if you go to Dojo data target, you can see that it has written a file over here. And if you open that file, you can see that the same CSV file has been rewritten as a JSON file. So my job has also succeeded. So with that, the workflow has completed. The next step is to clean up the resources so that you don't incur any cost post the workshop. So that was all for the workshop, guys, today. If yeah, and if you like this video, please click on the like button and please subscribe to my channel to learn more such workshop and exercises to practice on AWS services. And there are many similar exercises and workshop are published to our website aws-dojo.com to learn about AWS services, to implement certain scenarios, to get practice on AWS services. If you have any feedback or comment, either you can provide us in the comment section in the YouTube channel, or you can also click on this contact us tab over here, and you can provide feedback from there as well. And we always look forward to your feedback for improvements, for new content. So yeah, I look forward to what you say. So I promise to come back again in a few days' time with some new videos, some new scenarios to learn about AWS services. Meanwhile, please stay safe and have a nice day. Bye bye.